Joining me now is Michael O'Hanlon. He is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. He specializes in United States defense strategy and American foreign policy. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We have several reports claiming that Secretary Hagel was forced out, other reporting telling us that it was a joint decision. What are you hearing?
Well, I think it's pretty clear he was forced out. You know, he may not have strongly disagreed. He may have recognized that he had done 2 years, and that's a pretty respectable stint. But nonetheless, there's no doubt that his intention was to do 4 years. That's the standard tenure for most cabinet secretaries, unless something moderately extraordinary happens. And just 2 weeks ago, when he was asked about the rumors that he might be asked to step down, he repudiated them and said that he was intending to serve through the end of Mr. Obama's presidency. So clearly something changed, and clearly it wasn't his thinking, it was the president's. That's the way the job works. When you're Secretary of Defense, you work for the president, and if he doesn't want you any longer, you leave.
He is widely respected and he's very well liked, but one report today quotes a top U.S. administration official as saying Hagel, and I'm quoting it, just wasn't the man for the job. Is this a case possibly of wrong man in the wrong job?
Well, I'm still sorting through the rumors that we're hearing myself. And even though I know some of these people and maybe hear some of the rumors privately, I still don't quite know what to believe. Because I think it would be unfair to blame Hagel for most of the problems the world has seen in recent months, or for most of the problems the Obama administration has had. For example, on Iraq and Syria policy, most of the key decisions we made were back in 2011 and 12, before Hagel was even in the Pentagon job. And so I'm a little reluctant to say he wasn't quite the man for the moment, when in fact the crises of the moment are not really his doing. But perhaps there was a sense that he didn't have all the energy and creativity and strategic sense needed to fully cope with those crises. I think it would still be unfair to take that line of reasoning too far, because it's President Obama who set the parameters for what we would and would not do in Iraq and Syria. And I don't think Secretary Hagel was ever really empowered to do a lot of creative thinking on that front. So I'm still wrestling with just which rumor to believe. But I am confident President Obama asked Hagel to step down, and I am confident that some sense of unease about how the Middle East is shaping up and playing out was a key part of the calculus, but so was the Republican takeover of the Senate in early November and the realization that the administration needed some fresh blood.
So then, doesn't Hagel's departure reflect more on the man who hired him rather than Hagel himself?
Absolutely, yes. I think that's a very, very strong statement and a very good way to sum it up. Because not only is it Obama now who's, to some extent, viewing Hagel as, frankly, a lightning rod or even a partial scapegoat for current problems, but it was Obama who hired Hagel in the first place, partly because they were close confidants and political allies back when they were both in the Senate. And so the entire trajectory of Hagel's role in the Pentagon the last 2 years was entirely this president's doing. At one level, that's no big surprise. The president gets to form his own cabinet. But even more than in most cases, I think the timing of Hagel's arrival and departure and the specific reasons for both the arrival and departure had a lot to do with Mr. Obama's personal political needs, as opposed to Hagel's broader performance or broader standing in the community.
And did he have a bad start? We hear from Lawrence Korb, who's a former senior defense official, who says Hagel came into an impossible situation. He had a confirmation hearing that really weakened him, and we know how bruising that confirmation hearing was, and he inherited a budget that was impacted by a sequester.
I think Larry Korb is right. He usually is. He knows this town very well. But he also knows, and perhaps would agree with me, that a confirmation hearing in early 2013 is already a long time ago. And I don't think that if that had been superseded by a lot of positive dynamics, I don't think the confirmation hearings would make any difference whatsoever right now. And so in a way, people are trying to bring that memory back to help explain an event that has more to do with November 4th, 2014, and the president's political troubles at home than it does with the early 2013 confirmation hearing process itself, which again did probably reflect badly on Hagel on balance. but was a long time ago. And a lot more important things have happened since in terms of Hagel's job as Secretary of Defense. So I don't tend to place too much weight on those hearings of now almost 2 years ago.
Right, and we're also hearing other reports that Secretary Hagel was out of step with the new security challenges which are facing the administration right now. We had a report in the Huffington Post written by Medea Benjamin, who's founder of the anti-war group Code Pink. And she writes, Hagel was supposed to steer the Pentagon away from a decade of war, including bringing U.S. troops home from Afghanistan, and paving the way for a reduction in the Pentagon budget. The administration seems to have gone in the other direction, hasn't it?
Well, a couple of things to say about that. First of all, the Pentagon budget has been declining downward, and sequestration was never something that President Obama himself said he really wanted. And so therefore, for a critic of the administration or of Hagel to say that, that it's not coming down as fast as sequestration would require, that's not news at all. The administration has never wanted that level of sequester. I actually think the way Hagel has handled the budget pressures on the Pentagon has been pretty good on balance, given that this is a tough time. It's always hard to manage a drawdown. And I think Hagel's done it with reasonable balance and without a lot of people losing their temper or failing to work as a team at the Pentagon. So I would actually see that more as a feather in his cap than as a source of any kind of poor performance. And, more generally, I think Hagel's done some other good things. For example, with the Asia-Pacific rebalance. The widespread sense in the last 2 years in Washington and I think in much of the Asia-Pacific is that Secretary Kerry has not been as committed to that rebalance agenda as his predecessor, Secretary Clinton, and therefore the so-called rebalance lost a little bit of its energy. But Hagel, quietly and in his own steady way, maintained a bit of focus on the Asia-Pacific. And I think it was in a manner that even Chinese friends did not find overly assertive or confrontational. In other words, he did it the way it was supposed to be done, reestablishing and reinvigorating America's presence without doing it in a way that smacked of overt militarism. And that's an accomplishment. And so, again, I think Hagel did okay in this job. And even if we can perhaps find someone who's even better, I think he should still be viewed as a guy who had a respectable 2 years of performance in that position.
Looking at this report in the New York Times just this past weekend, which said that President Obama had authorized a bigger role for the U.S. military in Afghanistan in 2015. Might that have had something to do with the Secretary's departure?
No, again, you see, here's the problem on Afghanistan and on Syria and on Iraq. It's the president himself who has set the very clear parameters and constraints for American policy. And the president made some mistakes, I think. For example, believing that we could be in Afghanistan with NATO air forces and not come to the aid of our Afghan allies when they were under attack by a concentrated Taliban effort. I mean, I can't think of any major country on earth that would consider that to be a wise policy. Even if China and the United States are not allies, for example, I think China itself would also recognize, as a country that has economic interests in Afghanistan, that we all have some degree of hope that this country will stabilize. But previously, Mr. Obama insisted that NATO air power would not be used to defend Afghan army forces, even if they were under attack and under duress. That policy has now been reversed because Mr. Obama, I think, rightly realized that his previous thinking was mistaken. And Hagel had nothing to do with that earlier policy. It was driven, I mean, he implemented it, but it was driven by the president's strong desire to get out of Afghanistan, which, as you know, he's scheduled to do in 2016 when all American combat forces are supposed to leave. And I hope he'll rethink that departure date as well, because that, too, I believe, would be a mistake. So, you see, many of these policies on ending wars were very prominent in Mr. Obama's entire rise as a political force in the United States, and certainly in the way he campaigned for re-election in 2012. And that was well before Mr. Hagel was in the picture.
So what should we be looking for in a future Secretary of Defense? Someone who's a little bit more aggressive, perhaps even belligerent?
No, I don't think we need belligerence. And for example, in some parts of the world, I think that we're doing okay and should more or less be trying to steady the course, the Asia-Pacific being the main example, where I don't think there's any need for radical change from what Hagel is doing. Because, again, we're trying to reassure allies, help stabilize the region, be firm in defense of our interests, and yet not wind up in confrontation with China. To do all of that requires some degree of balance, some degree of calmness, and I think Hagel did a pretty good job there. The real problems have to do with the Middle East, where we are still in big trouble, especially in Syria, but also in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that's where I think the new secretary is going to have the greatest acumen, sense of the region, of its dynamics, of its politics. That's why, in addition to some very good civilians whose names are now floating about, Michelle Flournoy, James Miller, Ashton Carter, I would personally think we should consider bringing one of our retired generals who has a lot of experience in the Middle East to the Secretary of Defense position, Dave Petraeus, Stan McChrystal, or John Allen.
Okay, and looking at the pressure that might come on the president domestically, especially from Congress, we have now the Republicans controlling both the Senate and the House of Representatives. In the Senate, John McCain will become chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's a hardliner in the Senate. What kind of impact is that going to have on the conduct of U.S. foreign policy?
Well, I think you raise a very good question. Certainly having Senator McCain chairing the Senate Armed Service Committee is going to be quite important. It's going to give him a very powerful voice, starting with the question of how fast will the Senate confirm a successor for Secretary Hagel once President Obama nominates such a person? And I could imagine McCain using those hearings to dramatize his disagreements with the administration on Syria policy. He might even try to hold up the confirmation process if he doesn't like what he's hearing. And so on defense spending, he's going to have a powerful position for trying to increase the budget perhaps somewhat more than the president himself, although I would guess they would actually work together on that particular issue more than they would be at cross purposes. But it is an enormously important position, and I think you're very astute to raise it in this kind of a conversation, because people often overlook the role of Congress. But McCain, of course, is a very long-standing major voice on U.S. national security, and you add to that the power he's going to have now in this committee, and he could become easily the second most important voice on national security in the country in the months ahead.
Michael O'Hanlon, thanks for joining us, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.